Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, welcome back to the Order. I'm Celtic Templar, and today y'all, yes, we're going back to the American Civil War, and today we're going to be talking about a weird subject that many people don't really understand. Now before anyone starts thinking, what the hell Templar, are you making this up? I am not. In fact, I do most of my research on a lot of things, especially through books, and in such, this time instead of focusing on the South, we're going to go to the North, especially to a city that was actually planning on seceding from the Union. That's right, a city in the North, a major city in fact, that was planning on seceding from the Union. And that would be none other than the city of New York. Now, I can already hear many people already, especially New Yorkers, saying, Templar, I lived in New York all my life. I have never heard of us ever wanting to secede from the Union. Well, maybe because you keep reading a national textbook that which is approved by the national government instead of a textbook that was made before the 1960s or 70s, for example, which if none of you know what I mean by this, textbooks before the 1960s were always made by the state. Especially national history, mostly though, was somewhat made by a mixture of the state and the government. However, that was only put in there when you came to college, so it's kind of confusing, I know. But pretty much many of you might wonder, Templar, why does this need to be known? Simple, because the United States after the 1960s kind of what they called the civil rights washing, or in this case, the idealism that the American Civil War was always about slavery, when in truth, if any of those that actually know history know that it was not. And in such, different states fought for different reasons. And in fact, the southern states concluded themselves, or joined together to become the Confederacy. However, the Confederacy, as we put it, is what we might call separate system of states that of which were only fighting for one major goal, and that was to be rid of the United States. And in such, we don't know what might have happened after the American Civil War, but I have made a video on it, what might have happened if the South had won. Now we do have to understand though, the United States itself was entirely, well, different back then than what we think today. And the thing is, when we take a look in history, especially in New York, a major point of view that people think of that New York was a major supporter of the war to actually fight for the Union, which they were not, actually. In fact, New York wanted to stay out of the war entirely, especially when we take a look at the draft riots that happened in New York from 1861 to 1864. And the worst part of it is that it really was really bad for the United States to actually force many New Yorkers to actually, well, be part of the war, when many of them did not want to be part of the conflict entirely. And in such, this is where it gets very scary for many New Yorkers to understand their history, because one, when we take a look deeper into the look of history of New York, people automatically say that they were a major people that hated slavery and wanted to get rid of it. No. Actually, the slave trade was somewhat part of the entirety of the New York trading network. I'm not kidding. In fact, the entirety of the New York trade system actually included everything. In fact, it went from cotton, it went from wool, grain, corn, and as well glassware and household items, and even human beings. Yeah, the Great Apple is not what we might think as the freedom-loving state. Even today, it's not exactly that great of a state anymore, because we get a lot of them coming down here to Texas. But all of that aside, I want to put this out here that New York City itself wanted to stay out of the conflict, and it saw that it was about to head into conflict. Now, in doing so though, New York City itself was wanting to secede. Not the entirety of New York, but just the city itself. However, there were other Union cities in the North that were also planning to stay out of the conflict. And as such, even they were planning on seceding from the Union. However, it's specified that after the Battle of the Siege of Fort Sumter, for example, all that somewhat changed and made the people that wanted to secede look like terrorists or whatever. That's a good explanation as best I can explain. But now, maybe we should go back into history, shall we? picture yourself in an 1860, for example, New York City, the vibrant city that itself, from the area known, if we actually take a look at it, there is the places of, say, a great harbor, you have fields on Long Island and such, you have factories and such, you have a major population of a boom town, and as which you're pretty much the richest city in the state, or as well in the entirety of the United States at the time. That's right, New York was actually the richest city of its time back then, and as such, it's actually stated that a person that lived in New York themselves could actually, well, be paid like, say, $10 a day, compared to that of a person that lives, say, in the South that could only probably get paid around $5 a day. And this is back then, ladies and gentlemen, this is a different currency back then, so $10 a day could actually feed your family, and as well, even more so than that. In fact, you could technically, the best example of this could be, like, if you worked like this for at least 30 to 40 to 50 years, say, for example, you could probably be a billionaire by then. And this was only with the human male population. In other words, the male population did that much money and got that much money because of the area they were located in. So, when we take a look at it, New York City was probably the best place to live. In fact, even Southerners were even planning to move north because of this. Problem is, though, New York was getting overpopulated. And when I mean overpopulated, I mean extremely overpopulated. And as such, New York City itself even urged other people, who of which were moving to New York, to actually go somewhere else rather than just to go to New York. It's kind of like this. Imagine, say, for example, refugees from, say, Ireland or whatever, that were coming from on their potato boats, as the New Yorkers explain them, and as which they moved to New York. Guess what? They want to push them out of New York and into the rest of New York State, or as well into another state entirely, which is kind of a little bit of a racist idea, since we can understand. As well, we can also view this the same when we take a look in major forms in history. Now, people say today that Texas doesn't want to take in refugees from California, New York, and Chicago and stuff. Well, think of how we feel then. See my point? It kind of wants to keep the hell out of our state. In which New York City was kind of the same way. They were wanting to keep their city the way they want to run it, and as which make it richer. So, how did this end well? Well, not exactly the way you might think. In fact, it's actually stated that none other than the mayor of New York City, Fernando Wood, actually wants to lead the secession, and in such he does in 1860. And he stated that he did not want to join the Confederacy, but become the city-state of New York. In other words, make New York City a city-state. And in such, it would actually include the areas of Manhattan, Staten Island, and Long Island, and the entirety including of Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. That is saying of how big it was. So just imagine how big this place might have been for a city-state. And in such, they actually would call themselves the Triannular Republic. Which, I don't know why they would have called themselves. I would have just called myself New York City. Now, New York State would not be anything without New York City, so you see my point. So, what actually did this mean? Well, the reason they were trying to secede was for one major reason. That was because of heavy taxation that was destroying not just the southern economy, but even the northern economy. In fact, it's actually stated that the northern economy was also suffering because of heavy taxation that was caused by none other than Andrew Jackson, who and which was known as probably the most maddest president we have ever had. However, I don't know if that's actually true to today's form. You get where I'm going with this. And as such, there was a major problem also in New York right now during this point. There was actually the fact that they could not import or export certain goods because the fact is they were called classified, or as well sealed projects, or in this case illegal to import or export in the said area, meaning they couldn't ship it or they couldn't actually have it in their said area. And the thing is, New York City, with without that form could not actually thrive. And in fact, without the factories who needed Southern cotton, for example, when the Southern states seceded, well, you can see where this was going. And the fact is, this was 1860 when New York City was planning on seceding. And the fact is, it was actually gaining ground from 85 people on the population who were agreeing to secede against the 40% population that were not wanting to secede. In fact, it was 85 against 40. Guess who won? The people that wanted to secede from the Union. Now, I want to put this out here. This is actually a major deal that actually caused it. So, in such, trading and taxation is what caused New York to want to secede from the Union. And the thing is, New York City was actually the biggest naval power that the United States had. Without New York, America couldn't have made the ships they needed to actually fight in the American Civil War, meaning that trade blockade would never have happened without New York City. So, what happened? Why did this not work? Well, it happened because of April 12th of 1861, the attack on Fort Sumter. And in fact, the date at which it was said to happen for New York City to become a new, nation state would actually happen in May 1st of 1861. Oh, that was a whole month behind of which they needed to become a new nation. So would have New York probably stayed with the Union as soon as they become, a new nation? No, they would have probably stayed out of the war entirely and just waited for the war to go out. But in such, just imagine what might have happened if New York had seceded before the attack on Fort Sumter. In fact, it's actually stated because of that, New York City would have not given the United States its ships, it would not have given it its manpower, it would have actually even not even been able to give them its weaponry. Because mostly the United States put all its eggs in one basket by putting it mostly in New York. See how weird that sounds? Putting all your factories, all your ships, most of your manpower, and most of your taxation in New York City itself, and New York State itself, is what nearly destroyed the United States itself entirely, especially in the 1920s. So, you see how bad this ended up with this. Now, I want to put this out here. What many of you might not understand is what happened to many of the said delegates and as well officials who supported the secession. Many of you might wonder, what happened to them? Well, many of them were arrested and caught forms of treason and terrorism. Many of them were jailed and worse. So it did not end well. However, many of us do wonder, though, what might New York have been back then if it actually did secede. In fact, I would actually like every New Yorker to share this, tweet about this, because you gotta admit, this needs to be said about New York. This is back then when it was extremely strong about becoming its own nation. Now, many of you might wonder, Templar, could this have actually worked? Yes, it actually could have. And in fact, if we take a look in history, there are many nation states that actually did stay as a new nation beforehand, and in such, we actually can easily see that with not just the Greek city-states like Sparta, Athens, and such, but we can also see that with Venice, Italy, as well with the great trading empire Carthage that started off as a city, but then became a great empire. So in such, New York might actually have been able to even buy New York State itself, or as well, even buy the rest of, New England. Because it's actually said that most of the trade in New York City actually is what made the United States thrive. Without that trading port, the United States might have suffered. And the fact is, it might have forced the United States to actually lose the war entirely. So, pretty much, I had to explain this to y'all. We gotta understand, history itself has to be explained. Not through the form of the government, but through the form of the state. Because one, I actually hear that many New Yorkers do not know that this happened. So, what should we do? Pretty much as I said, we should have the state tell their history, not the government approve it. Because, one, no every state fought for the same damn reason. Excuse my French, but that's how it is. In fact, it'd be kind of like, for example, us saying that, for example, it'd be kind of like, say, for a Californian saying of what he knows about New York's, history in New York, when he's never lived there his entire life. or a person in Miami saying that he knows every part of history of Iowa. See my point? It doesn't make any sense if the government approves it because, one, government approved does not work. State approved does, with their history and such, because it teaches the correct value. So, yeah. I want to put this out here. I would have actually loved to have seen New York City become a nation, because that would be a little cool, because just think about it. If it actually did work, but we do know one thing, it would have actually succeeded in entirety. And in such, New York itself today is a little different compared to what it was back then. It would have gotten rid of heavy taxation, it would have had free importation and as well exportation of goods, as well it would have had massive job opportunities there in that city compared to what it is today. And in fact, from what I see, a lot of New Yorkers are leaving their homeland and coming pretty much here to Texas or Miami. And that's saying something. Now I want to put this out here. Florida and Texas agree on one thing. They should stay where they are. And the same thing can also be said about the people in those people that live in, well, New York and as well as California and such. Any one of them which are caravans that are leaving their homes, there's my point. Now, before anyone starts saying Templar, you're monogamous or whatever, here's the thing. It's the people that take charge that gets rid of big government. And the fact is, California and New York are the major big governments that have actually destroyed their own state because of heavy government type of influence. So, in other words, back there in the 1860s and 50s, New York was a supporter of the people compared to that of what it is today. But anyways, guys, hopefully you like this and subscribe. If y'all have any ideas of American Civil War I should talk about as well, please leave it down below in the comments below. If y'all want to know more information about this, I will leave it down in the description down below if any of y'all want to talk about it. Because, one, it's not just me that believes that New York actually, and as well, that knows that New York was going to become its own nation, but as well, there's a lot of other people. And the thing is, most Americans don't remember it. So, what am I saying? Well, I'm saying the obvious. America should remember, not forget. But anyways, guys, hopefully you like to subscribe as well. Also click that bell icon down below. As that way you can actually stay tuned for a notification when the next video comes up. As well, y'all like and subscribe for more. As well, as I said, any New Yorkers and anyone else, please share this so that way y'all can learn history of New York during this point in time. Because one, we do know one thing, it wasn't fun with the draft riots in New York. But anyways, guys, this has been Templar. Have a great day.